So what do we take away from this? Absolutely vital leadership lesson, right? Diverse teams, as you already knew, have greater potential, but as you also probably knew, they face greater challenges. It's hard to talk to each other across role groups at times. So overcoming those challenges requires building the right performance environment, which I'm going to call a psychologically safe, candid environment, and having the interpersonal skills to know that you might be wrong, you might be missing something, to generate curiosity, to get interested in what others are bringing to the table. And this is something we've studied at length in many different industries, and a couple of summary statements for how you encourage this, especially in higher level roles. You frequently call attention to the organization's purpose. Now, in a team, call attention to the team's purpose, right? This really helps people bond and work together. Frame diversity as a resource. I'm going to talk more about framing, but framing really matters. Create forums to learn more about each other. This might be such a forum. And finally, build psychological safety. So this is where I want to go now. I want to tell you what you can do in very concrete terms to build more psychological safety in your team, your unit, your organization. And each of these categories, 1, 2, and 3, is a kind of set of behaviors that you can enact in many different ways. The first one requires just a little bit of explaining. The others are simple, straightforward, right? So let me give you a little bit more. I started this with the near miss study, but a little more insight into framing. What we need to understand as leaders, as individual contributors, is that all of us, all the time, are framing. We do this unconsciously, and we have cognitive structures that shape what we see and what sense we make of it. The leader's job is to override the cognitive frames that we have. Now you might say, why? Well, I would say because most of us have some vestigial cognitive frames that we inherited from Henry Ford, right? Where we sort of think is the boss knows best and we're supposed to just follow orders and do what we're told, and something goes wrong, there's a culprit to blame, and so on. These frames are not helpful in today's world. And so you have to reframe the work. If you want learning, growing, reporting, errors, you need to reframe the work to bring shared meaning. And that's what I want to give you some examples. You're trying to remind people that the person on each side of them has a vital piece of the puzzle, that they have a vital piece of the puzzle, and that they are obligated to share it with their colleagues. This is one of my favorite healthcare leaders, Julie Morath. She was quite a pioneer in the patient safety movement in the US and was chief operating officer at a major tertiary care facility in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And she would, and this is back starting in late 99, frequently say things like healthcare by its very nature is a complex error-prone system. Now you know that already, right? Why does she say it? Well, because she's framing the work. She's saying, do not think of this as Henry Ford's workplace. Please know at all times something could go wrong. It's the nature of the system that we work in. Therefore, people who speak up, they're heroes, right? They're people who help us become excellent. It's a total reframe from the way people thought about it before. The way people thought about it before is you speak up, you're going to get blamed, right? Lay low. Okay, so lovely example from home turf. Framing is, it's important to know this, context specific. If you're in an automotive assembly line, you use a different framing statement than if you're in a variable, uncertain, complex environment like yours. And by the way, if you're in a scientific laboratory or an innovation consultancy like IDEO shown here, another frame would be more appropriate. Why does framing matter so much? Well, because uncertainty is higher as we go to the right here. Why does that matter? Well, because failure, like it or not, is higher as we go to the right here. So leadership is needed to help us be okay with that so that we can learn and grow from it. And so here's another framing statement from David Kelly, Stanford engineering professor, co-founder, and then longtime CEO of IDEO, arguably the world's most celebrated innovation consultancy, offices around the world, including in the UK. What's he doing when he says this silly nonsense, like fail often to succeed sooner? He's framing the work, right? He's saying In this kind of work, I know most of you have never gotten a poor mark in your life, but in this work, you must fail along the way or you won't be excellent, right? It's reframe, it's retooling the cognitive frames. So David, of course, is not saying go do sloppy stuff. He's saying do experiments. You know that, right? So there are three types of failures. There's simple failures where there is a right way, but for some reason it didn't happen. That's okay, let's learn fast. There's complex failures, of which you see many, where a bunch of things happen that have never happened in this exact combination before, error-prone system. And finally, there's smart failures, intelligent failures. Those are hypothesis-driven experiments. Please don't call anything intelligent just because you want to. There are criteria, right? And they are basically, you're in the midst of exploring some new opportunity for improvement. You are hypothesis driven. That means you've taken the time to think through what might happen. You're careful about that. And finally, it's as small as possible. You don't bet the farm on an unproven hypothesis, right? So those are the three essential criteria. Fail well, to me, means reduce preventable failures. Let's do what we can. Let's train people. Let's help people. Let's make the workplace as conducive to reducing preventable failure as possible. In your world especially, anticipate and mitigate complex failures. They're around every corner. And finally, promote and celebrate and hope you have more of these. So fail well really means if you want error-free care at the sharp end, you have to be error aware, catching and correcting, near misses even, all the way through. And this can only happen if people are completely free to speak up. Okay, so second thing, super easy. This is what those beautiful inclusive leaders in our ICU study did. They just, for whatever reason or training, they were proactive, right? They did things to overcome what I call the basic human challenge, which is, it's hard to learn if you already know. They reminded themselves to be curious, right? Ed Catmull, head of Pixar, brilliant, lovely, wonderful leader. And he says things like, if we as leaders talk about our mistakes, we make it safe for others to do the same. More technically, more precisely, ask good questions. This, to me, if you remember nothing else from this session, remember this. Your most important job as a leader at any level is to ask good questions. Questions that focus us on something that matters, you know, the patient's care, or the project, the QI project. They invite careful thought and they give people space to respond. I'll give you a couple of types. The kind that help us go broad. What are we missing? Who has a different perspective? Lovely question, by the way. And the kind that go deep. Oh, interesting. What leads you to say so? What's the concern you have? Can you give us an example? Right? What you're doing is showing people the respect that you care about their thinking. You want to know more. You're not grilling them. This isn't the Inquisition. This is the invitation. And finally, let's say you've framed the work, you've reminded people that we work in an error-prone system. You've asked people, what are you seeing? What did you see last night? I wasn't on. And then how do you respond, right? How do you respond to bad news? And this will be time, we'll almost be done here. Let's say someone calls in the middle of the night with bad news or with what you perceive to be a not very smart question. And you're a physician and someone calls. What do you say? You say, thank you, right? Thank you so much for calling. Alan Mulally tells a wonderful story. He turned Ford Motor Company back to Ford around a number of years ago, and tells a wonderful story where head of all of the Americas came to him with seriously bad news about a new product launch, and he said, everybody thought what was going to come out of his mouth was, Mark, you're fired. Not what happened. He said, Mark, thank you for that clear line of sight. How can we help? Right? What a brilliant response, right? It's appreciative and forward-looking. And Mulally says this wonderful thing in an interview. He says, you've got to make honesty positive because it isn't, right? It isn't naturally. He said, it has to be the red as a gem. I had to demonstrate with my behavior that I welcomed it. Most of us don't do that spontaneously. I'll give you one more quick example, and then I'll finish up from healthcare. This is a study that my colleagues and I did. I did with a physician and an economist, believe it or not, of 16 cardiac surgery departments adopting a new technology for minimally invasive surgery at roughly the same time. In one, we interviewed an anesthetist who told us a story, and here it is. He says, once an RN, a nurse, dropped a vein graft on the floor. Terrible mistake, right? You know that. She spoke up immediately. Surgeon didn't say a word. He just made another incision. Maybe a millisecond was lost. No yelling, no screaming. He didn't need to. She knew she'd made a mistake. To me, that's a humane response, forward-looking, life goes on. So, building psychological safety for teaming, for collaboration on the fly, and indeed for resilience, for burnout prevention, requires essentially these three things. And I'll now sum them up with one word each: humility. Have the humility to know and to say frequently what we are up against, the challenges that are many and enduring. Have the curiosity to ask good questions, and finally, have the empathy to mount a productive response. So let me stop here with the slides and open it up for questions and see what questions that you have.
Amy, thank you. That was absolutely fantastic. I just wish we had more time, and thank you as well for integrating in all of your work as well there around teaming. I know many people will be familiar with your work around psychological safety and the Fearless organisation. I can also heavily recommend Amy's book on extreme teaming if you've not come across it. Highly relevant for our work in health and care contexts. So before I ask some questions from the audience, I'm going to hand over to Joe Bennett, who is our guest questioner today. Joe is the Associate Director for Quality Improvement and Safety at NHS Lothian. Joe, over to you. You may need to unmute, Joe.
Sorry, thanks for that. That was really interesting, Amy. I suppose one of the things, it was great to hear the importance of psychological safety in creating those conditions for improvement and innovation. I was wondering if there's just any unique challenges around creating psychological safety in our publicly funded model of health and social care system in the UK. Do you think that generates any particular challenges for us?
No, I think it's a lovely question, and I don't think so. Right, in the following sense, the phenomena I've been investigating are truly they're close. They're related to human nature, and they're related to organizational nature. And I've studied public sector organizations. I've studied nonprofits. I've studied the most successful businesses, and I don't see very many differences in terms of people's spontaneous desire to self-protect and look good, and how easily that can dominate the purpose. It almost doesn't matter how limited their resources are. There's just it's very spontaneous. So doing some of these smart interpersonal behaviors of demonstrating interest, of reminding the purpose, of responding in a productive way, all of those can just keep reinforcing a work climate, and often a very local one, right? You can be in a very healthy, candid, profound team in a very broken, larger organization. And then that, in some ways, depending on what your role is, you can't worry too much about them. You have to worry about us. Like, how will we work together? So I don't actually have any particular, awareness of I guess, I mean, I understand the challenges, but I don't think the prescription differs.
Great, thank you. It's really helpful.
Thank you, Amy. We have some great questions coming in from our audience today in the chat box. So I'm going to start with the one that has the most votes for me to ask, and this is, how do you raise it if you are not feeling psychologically safe in the workplace for fear of retribution by the management?
It's a conundrum. So great question. And a conundrum is anything where you kind of think, I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't. And the way out of a conundrum, in my view, is to ask for help. And so when you are coming from a place of really caring about the purpose, and also a place of curiosity where, you know, you have something you want to share and you're always open to the possibility that you might be missing something, right? So then you're in a mindset where you are willing and able to ask for help, right? So you can phrase that in a variety of different ways, but it's, this might not be the time, but, right, something in my mind that I would love to get your thoughts on. And so you're inviting, you've got something you want to give or an offer, but you're letting people know right away that you don't see this as, you know, necessarily the best next thing since sliced bread.
Great, thank you for that answer, Amy, really helpful. We've also got a question from somebody who's clearly familiar with your work, because they're saying that psychological safety is welcomed by most of my team members, but not accountability. How do I move my team towards the learning zone of high safety and high accountability?
I'm tempted to say, well, that's another talk. But let me do my best, right? Because you're right. I spent all my time today on the vertical dimension. And my best answer on the horizontal dimension, sort of to increase the sense of accountability, the sense of drive, is it starts with purpose, right? It starts with just reminding, reinforcing, and being passionate about why it matters, right? Why it matters that we do what we do, and reinforcing also that you recognize this is hard, right? It's hard to come in every day and give it our best shot. It's hard to feel that sense of, ooh, I did it. You know, I can, when things go wrong, our natural brain response is pointing the finger somewhere else. Like it feels it's too threatening to think I did that, right? And yet more often than not, when things go wrong in complex error-prone systems, multiple factors contributed, which means you're not entirely at fault, but you're not entirely free of contribution either, right? So it's a sort of willingness to be compassionate enough to be focused first on the purpose, and then second, kind of compassionate enough to live with the following. We are, each and every one of us, a fallible human being, right? That's our lot in life, but we're going to do the very best we can because we care, because the work we do matters. And boy, is that true for all of you. So just that's leadership. Maybe it's leadership with a small L, but it's leadership when you get people to do things that are hard, not easy.
Great, thank you, Amy. So this question, I think, is probably particularly relevant to the UK context, where it's highlighting that many government-funded systems are heavily influenced by the 24/7 news cycle, the heavy media interest, the social media context, and hence they find themselves entangled in impression management. And that can really reinforce processes and decisions that can create fear in organisations. So if there was one action you'd encourage these system leaders to take to try and create that relentless focus on psychological safety, what would it be?
To me, it keeps coming back to the importance of what you do, right? That when the one action is keep putting that center stage, right? In a funny way, everything else can follow. So it's keep putting purpose center stage, and then if there was just a behavior that I would say needs constant refreshing, it's inquiry, right? I think the most important thing. Peter Drucker said this, famous management guru, that managers are not the ones with the right answers. They're the ones with the right questions. So. Catch yourself, like start thinking, watch yourself through the rest of today or maybe tomorrow. And how many genuine questions do you ask? We feel such pressure to have answers. We feel such pressure to tell people what we think, what we see, what's happening out there in the news cycle or elsewhere, that we forget, right? It's hard to learn if you already know. We forget that, in fact, we're seeing a tiny slice of reality at all times. So force yourself to ask genuine questions while keeping purpose front and center.
Great, thank you. This is probably going to be our final question time-wise, and I'm just going to jump down the list a little bit to pick one out that's focused on patient involvement. So, given the current emphasis on patient involvement and partnership in their own healthcare, how do you see the patient fitting in when things don't go well?
Well, of course, it is going to depend very much on the specifics of the situation. But I think nowadays we absolutely think of the patient as a member of the team, right? Obviously, an anesthetized patient has limited contributions, but they're still playing a vital role. Their presence, of course, but we have learned to honor the patients, and I think in the patient safety world, we have learned that patients are often, and patients' families are often, those who are the first to note, wait a minute, that's not my name on that script, on that order. You know, they matter, right? So part of the way we include the patients is we ask them questions, and we do this routinely now. Is it okay if I come in and draw some bloods, etc. But I think we need to respect their expertise on them. They're the expert in them and how they're feeling. Many adverse events have happened over the years because patients' complaints weren't taken seriously, or patients just tentative worries. But probably the most important thing is just continually reminding yourself that it's all about the patients. They are why we're here.
Absolutely. And I'm going to squeeze another one in because you were so concise there, Amy, in your answer. Thank you. And this one as well is getting lots of votes. So it's clearly an issue for a number of those of joining the call. So this is about what would you suggest in terms of addressing issues caused by a senior peer who creates a lot of fear of mistakes, which frequently paralyzes staff?
Well, there are different suggestions depending on what role you are in. If you are in a role where you can suggest a feedback session or a coach or something to help this person, then by all means do. If you're not in that kind of role, but you're in a role where you very much believe this is affecting your ability to work, and at some point you may have to ask for permission to offer the observation to that person that you are worried about the impact. That certain, very concrete, don't say your behavior, say when you cut Jennifer off, it worried me that we might miss something important, right? So the opportunity to give feedback. Probably the most important thing I can say to this question is, first and foremost, focus on what you can do where you are. The absolute human tendency, and I've seen this around the world, you start to think about these kinds of concepts, is to look up and say, oop, they're not doing it right. Resist the temptation. Don't look up, look down, right? Because that's where you have the most power and influence to shape the world. Look down, look to your right, look to your left. Say, what can I do? What can I do to draw out the very best in my colleagues, in my team? When you're in a position where you can influence behaviors of those above you, please do. But first and foremost, look at, it's the serenity to accept the things you cannot change and the courage to work on the things you can.
Such powerful advice, Amy. It's that old saying, isn't it, that all change starts with I. I just love that. Thank you. And so sad that we've run out of time. I wish we had longer with you. That has been absolutely amazing. There's loads more questions in the chat box. So thank you so much, Amy, for being so generous with your time today. We really do appreciate it. And also sticking with us through some very challenging technical moments there. Thank you. Before we finish, I just want to highlight that we are at the moment finalising our upcoming lineup in terms of future speakers. So please do keep your eyes peeled. You can sign up to our mailing list or follow our Twitter account to keep you updated. And also, of course, it's just to remind everyone that the rest of our back catalogue is available for you to watch and enjoy on our website, or you can visit us on our QI Connect YouTube channel. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and hopefully we will see you all next time. Goodbye.